Pigweed here. Today we review a brown ale and discuss the Crusades. Hello and welcome to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crow Hill. Good evening, Crow Hill.
Good evening, Pigweed.
So what's on your mind?
So I was thinking today about the power of the cross as a symbol and as a just something that really changes people. And I heard this story about this kid who was a secular kid, grew up in a secular household, and he wasn't doing all that well at math. And his parents heard that the Catholic school down the street had a really good math teacher. Mm-hmm. So they enrolled him in the Catholic school. And he went into the Catholic school and just absolutely changed his ability to understand math. He came back, he was really getting it and doing really well. And his parents said, so what was it that they did so different? And he said, well, when I went into class and I saw that guy nailed to the plus sign, I knew they were pretty serious.
Thank you very much.
So, now let's take a look at this hazelnut brown nectar from Rogue Brewing.
Go wrong with the Rogue.
Ale with natural hazelnut flavor, and it gives it says I like this little 5-pointed star on the back. Toffee a little bit, nutty a lot, malt a little bit.
Not so bitter.
That's kind of cool.
You know what? Yeah, you can look at that and really get a sense of what you're in for.
Of what you're in for, exactly. And it's 5.6%, which is a little strong for a brown ale, but not terrible.
And apparently goes well with a grilled cheese sandwich.
Okay. We'll have to try that sometime. I like grilled cheese sandwiches. But I've had this before, but this is the first time we reviewed it. It's a very, very drinkable brown ale. It does have the strong toffee hints to it.
Yeah, I'm getting toffee right off the nose.
Mm-hmm. The nutty, honestly, I get toffee more than nutty, personally. But
definitely. What do they say? They say you're going to get...
They say more nutty than toffee, but...
I'm not sure about that, but...
Yeah.
Really nice. It's a nice little twist.
It is a touch on the sweet side, but it's a
nice
very, very nice brown ale.
Yeah, a nice little hazelnut twist.
Yeah. So, yeah, give it one a try. Good old Rogue. Rogue is a good brewery, and that's a fun beer. So, we're going to talk about the Crusades.
Yes, for no particular reason. I don't know why. Just fascinating subject that I didn't know much about. I said, well, it'll take a few days to brush up on it. And the heck was going on there? So, what do you? How do you approach this?
So I guess my first concern about the Crusades is kind of setting expectations about what we're going to be able to say because. There's sort of as I see it, there's sort of 4 levels of knowledge about the Crusades.
Okay, good.
Okay, the first level is what you learned in elementary school, what you picked up from movies and TV, and what you hear from everybody else when they talk about the Crusades, which is almost entirely wrong.
Right.
It's just this twisted, weird. People, when they think of the Crusades, people have very bizarre notions about the Crusades, and that's just all wrong. So then, kind of the second level is what you learned from somebody with an agenda. Maybe you heard somebody who was trying to defend the Crusades, or maybe you heard somebody, whatever. Maybe you heard a Muslim talk about the Crusades who wanted to say they were terrible, right?
Yeah.
So, but then you learn a little bit more than you learned from school and what you picked up from TVs and movies. So you have more knowledge, but it's from a particular perspective. And then, so that's the second level. The third level is realizing that there are problems with that partisan perspective. There's another side to the argument. It's not so straightforward as the partisan wants to say.
So you're upping your knowledge here a little bit.
You know a little bit more. It's not the stupid caricature that you get in school, but it's also a little twisted. And then so you learn problems with that. But then the fourth level is actually knowing a lot about the Crusades, which is like master's degree, doctorate degree territory.
However, I still think that if during my research I had decided to go ahead and get a master's degree in medieval history to prepare for the show, still 50% of the people would disagree with what I had to say.
That's probably true.
I think historically, as far as tackling a historical subject, it's probably the most difficult thing to nail down or to get consensus on.
Right. Yeah.
I was listening to an In Our Time episode with 3 British historians who couldn't agree on many things, and I thought, well, what if you had a Jewish historian and a Turkish historian thrown in the mix?
Exactly.
They never get anywhere. You never get off the ground. Yeah. It's really something.
Yes, it is. It is a very complicated thing, and so I would say that you and I are in the 2 to 3 range. You know, right?
Okay, fair enough.
We don't have a master's degree in this.
Speaking of elementary school, my elementary school was called the Skyline Crusaders.
Is that right?
Now, I bring this up to my sister, who later, after she became a teacher, went back and taught at the school.
Right.
She's like, "What are you talking about?" She says, "We were the Seahawks," or whatever she said it was. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? We were the Crusaders." So somewhere, this is way before wokeism.
Right.
Somewhere along the line,
they decided that wasn't fair.
But I mean, that was back when nobody cared about how offensive a mascot was. But I was definitely Crusaders when I was a kid.
So I wanted to start just taking with the word Crusader.
All right.
Apparently, the word Crusader comes from the Latin word for the cross, and. So the idea was, sealed with the cross. Like Crusaders didn't think of themselves as crusaders; they saw themselves as sort of pilgrims in a way, almost like armed pilgrims.
Right.
But they were marked with the cross. They would put a cross on their garment for the whole time they were on crusade, and then they'd come back and they'd take it off. So Crusader meant marked with the cross, and I thought the reason I wanted to do that what's on your mind thing about the power of the cross was because people think of the cross very, very differently. You know, like some people think of the cross as a sign of oppression, right?
Creep.
Yeah, some people think of the cross as this, this lovely thing. Jesus died for our sins and all that kind of stuff. People, the way people react to the cross is very interesting. Like a Muslim would react to the cross one way, a Jew would react to the cross another way.
But in all of that, nobody really thinks of it as a torture device.
Exactly.
Which is what it was.
That's right. Yeah, I remember hearing this sermon from Billy Graham, who was saying, we read in the Gospels, take up your cross and follow me. He says, that doesn't make any sense to us. Here's what he's saying. Take up your electric chair and follow me.
Right. So if Christ had been stoned to death, right?
Yeah, everybody would be wearing little stones around their neck.
Exactly.
Right. Wouldn't be the cross; it would be the stone.
Now, I think one of the problems, or one of the things that we need to get out of the way, is the notion that the crusade was a thing done by a particular group of people for a particular reason.
Yeah.
And because once you go down that's how you're sort of miscommunicating, because everybody could be right when they're completely opposite from each other. Goes, well, aren't you aware that the Third Crusade was from these people from this place for this reason? You're like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the First Crusade where they went from this place to that place.
Yes.
Right?
And to make it even more complicated, generally speaking, we think of the Crusades as an effort to free the Holy Land so pilgrims could get to the Holy Land. But there was the Baltic Crusades. There were crusades
that never even made it to the Holy Land.
Yeah, well, no, they wasn't even. They had no intention of going to the Holy Land. Yeah. The idea was, hey, wait a minute, why are we going down there to fight heretics? There's heretics right up here,
around the corner. So especially you think of this 200 years.
Yeah.
So 200 years is at least 8 generations.
Yeah.
So what kind of changes take place in 8 generations? Maybe a lot. You have at least 8 popes. You have 8 changes of kings and leader, right?
Way more than 8.
Some popes don't go left.
They're usually old when they enter the office. I don't think they last all that long.
So you have motivations that change. You have allegiances and alliances that change, and you also have the historians and chroniclers of the time. Each have their own agenda when they are telling their story that gets passed on. And then the current historians can pick and choose whichever of those accounts in order to say, we know that this thing happened. Well, this thing could have happened in a place at a time. Does it characterize all 200 years?
Right. And you also have very different personalities at different times. You have Bernard of Clairvaux. You have Peter the Hermit. You have Louis the... Which Louis was it? Louis the 14th or something?
Okay.
Who went with his wife on crusade. So you have all these very influential characters at different stages. We have Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah, I know. What a great character.
So you've got all these different people that all get kind of thrown into this mush in our minds of the Crusades. Well, they're very different. The First Crusade, radically different from the Second Crusade, from the Third, and all that kind of
All right, so let's just to try to bite off one little chunk.
Yeah.
What led up to, what motivated the First Crusade, and how did it go? And that's really all that's about all we're going to cover. That should give us some idea of how things got started, with the understanding that Crusades 2 through 9 are all very different, and that only talks about up until the point where they lost the Holy Land. And like you said, Crusades went on for centuries afterwards. It never thought about the Holy Land.
Yeah. So let's just kind of do a quick run through history. Okay. So Christianity starts. Christianity is being persecuted by the Romans. Christianity is eventually adopted as the state religion of the Roman Empire.
Right,
it's made legal by Constantinople, or by Constantine. Sorry. And then, so Christianity becomes the dominant religion in the Roman Empire in Europe, and that goes on for a couple hundred years. And then and all through that time, people are traveling on pilgrimage to the Holy Land from Europe. They're going to the Holy Land to go on pilgrimage to see Jerusalem, to see all these other things, right? So
this is going on for 600 years, right? So you've got the Romans, the fall. Well, yes, because the fall of the Western Empire didn't really affect the Roman influence in the Holy Land, right? I imagine
the Eastern Empire had control over there, right?
Byzantine. Well, they didn't consider themselves Byzantine. I think historians just made up that name
exactly.
later on, just so you can keep things straight between East and West. But they were the continuation of the Roman Empire.
But basically, if you were in France and you wanted to go on pilgrimage, you were traveling through Christian lands.
Yes.
To go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, right?
For 600 years.
For hundreds of years, right? So then the Muslims, Islam starts in 610. The Arab Muslims conquer parts of Spain. Muslims attempt to take Constantinople and advance in Western Europe in the 700s. The Muslims are moving into Europe. Good old Charles the Hammer defeats the Muslims at Poitiers. So we have this incursion of Islam. Islam starts over in Medina and gets going and spreads all through North Africa into parts of Asia Minor, into parts of Europe.
And by 700, they have taken the Holy Land.
Yeah,
and now Jerusalem and what we call Israel today.
Yes, and so if you think of it this way, Islam basically took over half of Christendom.
Okay.
All the areas of the world that were Christian to some extent, Islam wiped out half of it and took it over. All right, so then that's somewhat of a background. 1054, you have the great schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. That's when the Eastern Church and the Western Church disagreed about the role of the Pope and a couple other things, and there was this big schism. Then the Seljuk Turks take Armenia, Edessa, and Antioch, which were important. So in the Eastern Church, you had these things called patriarchies, which were important cities where the patriarch from that city was considered an important leader in the Christian church. So Rome was one of the patriarchies. You had other patriarchies in Antioch and other places. Well, the Turks came in and took over those places, and this was seen, especially in the East, as a huge blow to Christianity. So
it's taking up the territory of the significant territory of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire.
Yes.
And I guess what you're getting to is this is the pathway to the Holy Land.
Yeah. So what has happened is the Muslims have come in and they've taken over cities that are historically very, very important to Christianity, and the path to the Holy Land is no longer through Christian land. So the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Komnenos, I don't know how to say that, asks the Pope for help. Now the Pope sees in this, great, this is a chance to heal this schism.
Yes.
With the East, because we had this schism a little while ago. Let's go help them. Let's cure this problem.
It seems like a great
Unite
idea.
Christendom back again. And let's
now. So, well, how does he tack on the a trip to the Holy Land, like, well, after we get to Constantinople and help out our Eastern brothers, we'll cruise right on down to Jerusalem.
Right.
What was it?
Well, that was the idea. The idea was to kind of retake some of the land so that pilgrims
since we're marching against the Turks to rescue the Eastern Empire, we might as well keep rolling on down and get the Holy Land back.
Right. Yeah.
Bigweed here. We love receiving comments from our listeners, and so if you have something to contribute, comment, disagree, we'd love to hear it. We can be reached at bigweedshow@gmail.com. Just called Pigweed, but Crowhill will listen to.
Right. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting to know is that before the Crusades ever started, it was relatively common for, people were going on pilgrimages down to the Holy Land all the time from Europe, and sometimes they would have armed escorts. Because even though they were going through allegedly friendly territory, there's always bad folks.
Yes, right. So even if it's... Now, my understanding is, while the area is controlled by Muslims for, say, so we're talking 300 years,
mm-hmm.
This was like a beach town that cashes in each year on the summer tourists.
Yeah.
So for the most part, they were friendly to the idea of European travelers.
Right.
But there's always bands of bad guys that you're not in control of,
yes,
right? I mean, this is the 10th century, for crying out loud.
Right. So it was relatively common.
Right, but it became increasingly dangerous.
Yes. But it was relatively common for pilgrims on religious pilgrimage to have knights, to have armed escorts go with them on pilgrimage.
Sounds
just because,
cool.
it's kind of dumb to go on a trip without some sort of escort or something. So, but then what happens is the Seljuk Turks came in. It becomes a real serious problem, not just for pilgrims, but also for the Eastern Empire. So the Pope says, okay, it's time we need to retake some of this land. We need to go help our brothers in the East. We need to, clear this stuff out. So that's the First Crusade.
So this speech, right, he gives, was it 1095? Pope Urban II.
Pope Urban II,
in Clermont, France, declares this, and then Peter the Hermit gets wind of it. Whoever this guy is, he's apparently a heck of a speaker. And he's like, that's a great idea. And jumps out ahead of the actual crusade, which is knights and organized army.
Yeah.
And it's just
called
the People's Crusade. It's just people.
Just a bunch of people say, hey, let's go. And they start going.
They start going, and of course they don't have any supplies, so they have to sort of steal and pillage along the way. And
it's a big mess.
It's a big, huge mess. Finally, they get to Constantinople before this troop. The real Pope Urban's troops get there.
Right.
They start heading south anyway and end up getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
Peter...
It's a big disorganized mess. Apparently Peter the Hermit was one of these, God will protect us and provide for us. We don't need any planning or anything. Who cares about packing a sandwich? Just go.
So, I think this was a setup. It set the expectations of the Turks in a weird way, so that when the actual troops come across, the leader of the time, whatever his name is, gets wind of it, but he's busy fighting off somebody else in the east. So he's like, it's those crazy barefooted French lunatics. I'll deal with them later.
Right.
And in the process, allows the real troops to get a foothold.
So then, now apparently the First Crusade was a combination of remarkably good luck and incredibly clever leadership and remarkably brave people. It's like all the best things came together in the First Crusade.
So if you're already of a mind that despite the odds, the just and the righteous will be aided by God.
Yeah.
And then you have this series of wins. Well, what else are you going to attribute it to? Frankly, just being a non-religious person, you're going, come on.
Yeah. It was amazing what they did in the First Crusade. The First Crusade was astonishing. And apparently, like, there were all these so-called miraculous things that happened in the First Crusade.
Yeah, what about the spear?
Yeah, well, we should have our friend Longinus in here because so apparently they found the spearhead. Longinus is the guy who stabbed Jesus on the cross, right?
Yes, the Roman centurion who eventually converts, becomes a saint. But that sword was a real. I mean, that spear is they were big into relics. They were big into relics at the time. And it just so happens that they find...
it's even more interesting than that. So apparently the Christian forces were not doing that well. They're trying to take Jerusalem. They're not doing that well. There's a Muslim army that's going to show up the next day to reinforce the Muslims defending Jerusalem. And that day they get into Jerusalem. They break through. Somebody opens the gates. The Christian forces come in. They take the city, and now they have the strength to defend themselves against the Muslim reinforcements which are coming. And at that same time, they find the spearhead of Longinus. So I mean, there's all these wacky things that happen.
Right, but if you look at this map of the Crusader states, they knew that you can't just sweep around the cities and try to go straight to Jerusalem.
Well, there's nothing out there. You're gonna walk. What are you walking through?
And you're going to need supply lines and communication lines. So you have to take cities along the way. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, I mean, I guess they could have gotten in boats and just made a bead straight for Jerusalem.
I never understood. The more I listen to stuff about the Crusades, I never understand why they didn't go by boat.
Well, later on they figured that out, and the only reason that they were able to hold on to it was, I don't know, were the Europeans just much better sailors? Why did they control the Mediterranean Sea so well? So that even though they're only holding beachfront castles,
right?
But these beachfront castles have ports,
yeah,
and ports and people in Venice,
that's supply lines, right? Yeah.
So, but they did battle their way down, taking everything in between. We've got Antioch, which is now in this part over here is Turkey, but this is Syria. You remember hearing about Aleppo. And this is Lebanon.
Right.
So you've got Syria, Lebanon, and Israel today are broken up into these smaller.
So apparently, after the First Crusade, the Crusaders had this great success, and they established 4 Latin-ruled Crusader states.
Right.
There's the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
The county of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the county of Odessa.
Yeah. And
those were the big areas that were ruled by the Crusaders. Although the other thing that's kind of weird about this,
it's really hard to understand. I mean, not to understand, but to imagine how that was a functioning thing.
Especially
for
since
200 years.
Especially since this was basically a pilgrimage. You go on pilgrimage, you go to Jerusalem, you pray, you look at some things, you go back home, right?
Exactly. Well, that is the problem with the Crusader states for the whole time.
Yeah.
Is people are certainly willing to go, but they're not colonizing.
Yeah, they're not going there to stay. They're just going there. I'm going to go. I'm going to fight. I fulfill my obligation. Now I'm going back to France.
I'm going to go back. And everybody's going to know that I'm the kind of guy that would do such a thing. And by the way, I just punched my ticket straight to heaven. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. But nobody's going down there to stay. So there's always a shortage of manpower.
Right.
This is the other thing. So they built these series of castles. All right, it's just your bare hands and some sticks. How fast can you build a castle? I remember reading about when the Normans took England. Boom, 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 boom. Just castles are just popping up everywhere. You see those things? I mean, what do you do that with ropes and manpower?
I don't know.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
And then often on a cliff edge, often. You know, you want one side of your castle to be at the ocean's edge. Mm-hmm. How are you doing all of this?
So I think sometimes we underestimate the engineering smarts of people in the ancient world because, like, the Romans built all kinds of really cool stuff. You know,
that's still there.
It's still there. You know, it's still you can go and see.
There are ports here in the Mediterranean that were built by the Romans using cement. That they still don't know how they made it or why it's still. So you're making these blocks.
They developed a kind of cement that would cure underwater.
Yeah, what?
We have that now.
Of course.
Yeah, but
that's what I'm saying.
But but it was a big important development to be in order if you're gonna try to make a port, the ability to have cement cure underwater is a pretty doggone important
Right,
thing.
so otherwise you just have to move rocks to that spot. No, we'll just make our own rocks and our own square rock wall.
Yeah.
It's
all amazing.
That is amazing. So, all right, so where are we?
Okay, so we've got the First Crusade,
which is a miraculous event.
Right. It's absolutely amazing. They go in, they conquer Jerusalem, and it's wonderful. But I think they didn't think this all the way through, right? Like, okay, what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
Because you're surrounded by
zillions
of screaming Muslims.
Do you think that they're all going to go, oh, well, we lost.
Sorry, you can have that now.
Yeah.
Right. So also, I want to back up just a little bit.
Feel free.
So the whole question of, we generally think of the Crusades as some horrible thing where people are going to war to fight for. We have.
You're right. No, they're greedy, hateful Europeans who just want to murder Muslims and plunder their land and get rich.
Yeah, and we have such a radically different context for understanding this whole thing. On the one hand, we live in a secular society. We don't think of ourselves as a Christian nation. We think people of all religions are welcome here. So we don't think of things in terms of the Christians versus the Muslims.
Yes, if you time traveled to this period, you just wouldn't even get it.
No,
right?
You wouldn't understand it at all.
So, and you're not. This isn't multiculturalism.
Right.
Everybody gets it. Everybody's on board with the same religiosity, the same thinking. It's just the way the world is.
And also, the other thing that we completely don't get is the idea of conquering territory, right? Like, it doesn't even occur to us to think, let's go conquer Bolivia, right? I mean, we don't think about that. It's just not. It's not even in our mindset.
Right. You know what? Alberta, Canada has really good farmland.
Let's go take it. Right. But that was a very common way that things were done back then. So
yes, not by Europeans.
By everyone, everywhere on the whole planet. Yeah. So okay. So think of it this way. Imagine that you have a country. Imagine you're in France, and France is a Christian kingdom, right? And some other group comes in and conquers half of France. All right. Now, do you think the leaders of the Christian France are just going to sit back and say, okay, oh well.
We tried.
We tried, we lost. It's yours now. No, they're going to try to fight back. And the thing that people don't, in my opinion, the thing that people don't get about the Crusades was that it was Christian Europe punching back against Islam, which had been provoking and fighting them for hundreds of years.
And the other thing is, you know what? They went and took their lands. You want to play the game of who's there first, right? Jesus, all right. So Jesus died 600 years before Muhammad was born.
Yeah.
So we didn't take their. If you want to talk about who took whose land,
right? And that becomes it becomes a ridiculous game. I mean, the farther you go back in time,
nobody owns the Hittites,
exactly,
and the Canaanites.
Or how about let's go back to the Neanderthals? How about that? I mean, who owns the land? It's just a stupid thing. So this, what was happening was Islam, as I mentioned before, Islam had wiped out about 50% of Christendom, and eventually, belatedly, in my opinion, they finally said, "Okay, we need to fight back."
All right, so here's this is part of the anti-Christian argument,
right?
That look, Jews and Christians lived perfectly fine under Muslim rule. It was no big deal. When the Christians came in and took Jerusalem, they booted out all of the Muslims and all of the Jews. They couldn't go into Jerusalem, so it was actually a pretty nice time to be to live as a non-Muslim under Muslim rule.
Okay, so first of all, obviously, Christians, like anybody else, did some bad things, right? Like they probably did abuse some Muslims and Jews and do some bad things.
It's the 11th century.
Exactly.
It's kind of what we do.
And actually, I mean, it wasn't very long ago where the United States just went and blew up like 15 school kids because we thought we were killing a terrorist or something. I mean, these things happen. But also Christians and Jews, when they lived under Muslim control, yes, they had some kind of limited freedom, but they had a heavy tax that they had to pay.
And they were second-class citizens.
They were second-class citizens. Also, so that's one part of it. The second part of it was pilgrims were not...
Again, hold on. But again, like we were saying, this is 200 years. It's not like there's one set of rules for 200 years.
I know.
So yes, you can point out, you can find a time where just such a thing was taking place. This is before I'm forgetting how they say that. What's the first part of the Turks? The Seljanics? The Seljuks?
Seljuk Turks.
The Seljuk Turks. Yeah, things got a little bit different when the Seljuk Turks took that place. There was never, or maybe in the very beginning, there was this pan-caliphate, which ruled, was run, which was one big Islamic government.
Yeah.
But you had Sunnis, Shias, you had Persians, Turks, Arabs. This is, people are always, these lands are changing hands all of the time. So, yes, you could probably find a time where it wasn't that bad to be a Christian living in these lands.
Yes, but there were political alliances. Political alliances changed all the time on the Muslim side, and political alliances changed all the time on the Christian side.
And even the cooperation between the two.
Yes. So there were times when they got along fine, and then there were times when they didn't. I mean, so what are you going to say? I mean, there were atrocities on both sides. There were people are rotten and people do bad stuff.
Right. And it's standard fare that after a prolonged siege and you finally break through the walls of the city, you don't shake everybody's hands and say, hey, no hard feelings.
Yeah, right.
Look, what happens is there's like a 3-day plunder.
Which apparently was like standard practice.
It's just standard practice, no matter who you are.
Yeah. This is, okay, how are we going to get paid? Oh, the standard 3-day plunder rule. Yeah. You don't get any pay until we win, and then you get to take whatever you want.
If you win, you get a few days to get what you can get.
Yeah. So there's a lot of silly things that get said, like, there was blood up to their ankles and all this other kind of stuff.
Wait. All right. Let's just say you're in an Olympic swimming pool.
Yeah.
How many? Right, which is not nearly the size of the entire city.
Right.
The acreage inside of the city walls.
So let's take all the blood out of 3,000 people
in a swimming pool, and maybe you could get to your ankles.
Maybe, yeah. If you drained all the blood out of 3,000 people.
When you see somebody with a horrible crime scene, there's a puddle like the size of a trash can lid.
Right.
It doesn't all come out of your body. Right. Enough does. There's or some of them, it's up to, they're wading in it.
Yeah. Wading through blood. Yeah. So supposedly, according to one thing I heard, supposedly what they were doing when they wrote it that way, when they said, there's blood up to our ankles and blood up to this, is they were making allusions to a chapter in the book of Revelation in the New Testament that talked about battles in that kind of way, with blood, blood up to this certain level. So it wasn't. You had two things going on. On the one hand, everybody always wants to say that the battle was bigger and badder than it really was. They want to say that their victory, it was us 10 guys against 10,000 of the other guys, and we beat them all, right? And it was so bad that we were wading through blood. So there's sort of the fishing story. The fish was this big.
That's contemporary remembrances.
Accounts, right? Yeah.
And now we're talking about the 10th century, 11th century.
But historians going back and looking at it say, come on, don't pay attention to that. Those things didn't really happen.
But those are the kinds of things that sound so fun. You can't pass them up. To support. Let's talk about the motivation. Let's talk about the guy who's signing up.
Okay.
So there was one persistent rumor, that the knights are the second and third sons,
right,
of kings, because only the first son really gets any property.
Right.
And so they got to make some dough some way. So these guys just saw this as an opportunity
to go out and kick some butt and get some money and
get some cash. Well, first off, first sons all day long.
Right.
Were the ones that were going, and it was very expensive to go to Vietnam. There's no GI anything. Okay, there's no government issue.
Right.
Anything.
Yeah.
We want you to come to war, and you bring everything you think that you need.
Yeah. Imagine the government says, okay, we need a bunch of people to go to fight in Afghanistan.
Right.
Okay, so you got to buy your plane ticket.
Here's a camping list.
Yeah, you got to buy your plane ticket. You got to buy your gear. You got to buy your weapons. You got to buy your ammo. You got to buy your food for the next year. But come on, let's go. Right?
Right.
Yeah, that's basically the size of it.
Yes. So people were mortgaging their property to pay. You have to have your fighting horse. You have to have a backup horse. And you have to have
armor,
a horse to carry your stuff because you're on one. You don't want to work together. So you're in three deep in horses. So you need a team, a cook,
right, a groom, right,
right. So one number there were 75,000 people at the siege of Nicaea, with 7,500 knights. And I forget how many regular foot soldiers. All the rest of it is
camp followers,
followers, family,
servants,
hookers,
all that other kind of stuff. Yeah, So the idea that a lot of people think people were going to fight for wealth and fame and money and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, in any situation, you're going to have people with bad motives, right? You're going to have people who want to go in because I just want to kill some of those stinking Muslims, or I want to go rape some Muslim women, or I want to go steal some Muslim cash. Obviously, you're going to have that, but you have to also add into the motivation. Some people were thinking, no, look, we need to defend Christendom against this incursion. We need to make it so pilgrims
They found the speeches of Pope Urban,
Bernard of Clairvaux,
Peter
the Hermit, right?
Are going, yeah, it's exactly what we need to do. Give your life some purpose. Hey, might get to travel.
Right.
Wait, maybe there is some plunder on the way. But guess what's most important? The remission of sin and a path to heaven. That's not a bad motivator.
Right, and also just kind of restoring Christendom, which has been under attack for hundreds of years. So I think, obviously there were people with bad motives. Obviously there were wicked people. But there were also a lot of people who were motivated by not horrible incentives.
Now, and this is another motivation that I heard about. Tell me what you think. That you had this class of knights are professional soldiers. Mm-hmm. That's all you do, right? You train and you get ready for war, and then there was lots of warring amongst tiny little fiefdoms, and after the fall of Rome, right? So everybody's there's this warring class, fighting. As things settle down a little bit, under the umbrella of Christianity, you still have these fighting men with nothing to do. Bored men sitting around creating trouble.
Right.
And so the Pope's like, you know what we could do? We could put these guys to use and calm things down a little bit if we give them something to do.
Well, there was the problem. A lot of Christians were fighting against each other.
Right.
Right. So you had all these in Europe. You had all these different groups fighting against one another, and the Pope was like, "Hey, why don't you guys unite and fight against the Muslims instead of fighting against one another? Go take Jerusalem back. Push back against these people who are trying to destroy Christianity."
Right. But it's one of those processes of figuring out history. It's never one thing. But that could have been part of it. I mean, that could have played into the psyche of making this decision. Like, you know what? And you know what? First off, we need to take this back. And guess what? We got plenty of guys to do it. Because they're itching for a fight. And all they do is train. They're fit and they're ready to fight. So, I don't know. I don't think that's such a criticism as just saying it was part of how all of this came together.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the fact that these people don't stick around. They show up with their crosses on, do the deed, go home, take the crosses off, high five, and the people there are going, we need some permanent people, which is when we get the warrior monk.
Well, that's when you get a lot of the religious orders, the Templars and Hospitallers.
The Teutonic Knights.
Right. All these people who So for a lot of
so
people,
they're kind of monkish in
yeah.
their
For
way.
a lot of people, the crusade was like a pilgrimage. You did it, you were done, you went home. But then people realized the problem here is we actually have to have somebody who's committed to this. So they came up with these orders of people who were basically committed to lifelong crusade.
Uh-huh.
That's what the Templars and these other people were doing. Is they were saying, I'm just committed all in my entire life.
When was St. Augustine? Do you have any dates on him? Is he in this era?
No. Way early. St. Augustine is like the 4th century.
Okay. What I'm getting at is Jesus' message is all about peace.
Well, so this
where's the reconciliation? Is St. Augustine the just war? Am I thinking of the right guy?
Yes.
Okay, so how is it? Is this part? How do we reconcile these two things? How do you get warrior monks for crying out loud?
Yeah. So this has been a long-term problem in Christianity. Is obviously there's a lot of stuff in the Bible. You know, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn them the other cheek as well. If someone makes you go 1 mile, go with them 2. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. You know, there's all this emphasis on nonviolence and forsaking that kind of way of life. At the same time, you have the just kind of fundamental natural law right of being able to defend yourself, being able to defend your family.
Sure.
Right? So it's been an ongoing...
Somebody comes in your house and steals your Bee Gees records. You just don't stand there and watch them walk away.
Yeah, especially if it's Bee Gees records. so you do have this conflict that Christians tried to resolve for a long time, and I think it's part of why Christianity was so passive in the face of Muslim aggression in taking over a lot of these areas, that a lot of Christians kind of didn't really believe that fighting was the right path. And eventually people had to reconcile this and come up with this just war theory. Well, I mean, just war theory was done earlier, but it took a while for it to kind of develop into the culture that, sorry, there are times when it's appropriate to fight. And it's still a problem, and it's still a problem today.
But it seems like there's this, at this time, there was a particular... They've really come to terms with a monk warrior class. Yeah. So without having any problems with that.
Well, if you think about it, you're a Christian father, and all of a sudden people are coming and breaking into your home, killing your children and your wife, and you're just going to sit back and say,
I'm a peaceful man.
I'm going to turn the other cheek.
Yeah,
no, you don't. Obviously
I'm
not.
a good Christian.
So people had to kind of work through all this and realize, I think the most important thing is that there's a difference between what I am willing to suffer myself versus what I'm willing to suffer as being part of a community or part of a family, in charge of a family, right? So if someone insults me personally, I don't stand up on my...
challenge them to a duel.
That's not the right thing to do. But if somebody's trying to attack my family, that's a different thing.
And in this case, you're fighting for Christendom.
Yes. So I think eventually people had to kind of figure out a way to reconcile these competing ideas. And in my opinion, the way to reconcile it is that the pacifist kind of language, if someone hits you on this cheek, turn the other, that's not talking about attacking you, that's talking about insulting you. Right?
Okay.
And it's talking about, don't stand on your personal dignity, don't be, this big macho guy, but at the same time, you have to stand up for things that you believe in. And so that I think was part of what was being developed at that time, is figuring out how to reconcile those things.
Okay, so we've made it as far as the first couple of years of the very first crusade.
Right.
It took about 3 years anyway, right? So it took, or 4 years. I think it was 95 was the speech, and then
99 when they took Jerusalem.
And then 99 when they took Jerusalem.
So I got a couple of things I wanted to read here, but I thought were pretty good, which were lessons. So common sense makes it difficult not to see, among the chief lessons of the Crusades, 1, don't conquer half of another group's civilization without expecting reprisals.
Okay,
I think that's fairly fair. How about this? Don't touch a people's holy sites without expecting retaliation.
Yep.
Seems fair. And how about this? The Crusades themselves had two important goals at their core: the defense of Christian civilization against outside aggression, and securing access to holy sites. So those things were big. Obviously, there was a lot of abuse. Obviously, stupid things happened. People did awful things because people are.
But
awful.
this is definitely framing it in a defensive war.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I'm sure there are Turkish scholars
who will say differently.
who will say differently.
That's right.
But I think that makes a very solid. That's a very solid argument. Or how about this? So after 9/11, and people are really getting on board with the idea of Islam just being a violent religion.
Right.
Hey, yeah, but what about the Crusades and the Inquisition? Christianity is just as violent.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I don't think so. Because we weren't suffering through hundreds of years of people taking our territory and taking over, stopping pilgrims from going to holy sites until we finally woke up and did something.
Right.
Yeah, it's not.
And what you're talking about something that happened 1,000 years ago versus something that happened yesterday. So we've kind of purged some of the medieval tendencies of Christianity in 1,000 years.
I would hope so.
And certain somebody has not. So yes, well that's just sort of a demonstration of how difficult it is to wrap your brain around the Crusades.
It's a complicated
thing.
We're only scratching the
only in the first 4 years of 200 years,
and only scratching the surface of that.
Oh, still just scratching the surface of that.
Yeah.
So if anybody is looking for a field that has not been exhausted,
there's a lot to study there. Exactly. Yeah, you can study a whole lot more on there. All right, so I think we have I have a proposed man of the week.
Bring it.
So, I don't know if you remember, but Joe Rogan, the podcaster, was attacked by CNN, and people said that he was taking horse dewormer he got COVID, and he was taking the
ivermectin.
Right? Yeah, and they were characterizing it as if he was going to the grain store.
What a dope!
Like going to but no, he talked to his doctor. He got a prescription for a drug that was prescribed for humans in human levels, right, for certain things. And what I like about this is, I don't care what you think about ivermectin or Joe Rogan or anything else, but he had Sanjay Gupta on his show, and he basically took him to task and say, "Here, you're the medical guy for CNN." Was it CNN? Yeah. You're the medical guy for CNN.
Right. So he didn't accuse him directly.
Right.
He says, but you need to acknowledge that your station is a bunch of liars.
Yes, and they're relying on a medical issue. And are you okay with that?
Are you okay with that? Yeah. And then he tried to recouch it in, they probably mischaracterized, and he would not budge. He said, no. That's not what they were doing.
Yes.
They were lying. They knew exactly what they were saying, and they were deliberately trying to defame me and anybody else.
Right.
So how about this one? Do you remember? Somebody tweets out that there are so many people going to the emergency room for taking horse paste that gunshot victims could not get into the hospital.
Which was a lie.
And yes, but Rachel Maddow and half a dozen other didn't even bother to call the hospital.
Didn't even bother to check because it fit their preconceptions.
They
loved their narrative.
First off, there's a bunch of anti-vax idiots taking horse veterinarian drugs and getting sick from it and making other people suffer for it. I love it. Great story.
Yeah. And unfortunately that's the way news goes nowadays.
And then nobody recants anything. Nobody apologizes for anything.
Yeah, I know. If it fits with your narrative, off you go.
But he just kept
pushing them.
Yeah, he says it's a lie on news network. It's a lie they're conscious of. It's not a mistake. They're unfavorably framing it as a veterinary medicine, and that's never what it was.
Right.
But, moving on. Well, good for you, and the whole world has taken, the whole Joe Rogan world, which is bigger than you think.
A big world, yes.
Has taken note of this. And good for you, Sanjay, who probably knew you were walking into something
you know,
a little bit.
He was okay. I mean, he didn't. I think he could have come back and said, you know, they were wrong. He could have stated a little bit more clearly, but Joe
was
wouldn't
a
let him
little
go.
wishy-washy.
Yeah, but Joe wouldn't let him go, and I say, way to go, Joe Rogan. You're the man of the week.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe.
If you like Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill, please like it, share it, give us a good review, post it to Facebook, all that good stuff. Thank you so much.